Welcome to the debut episode of the Sales Leadership Lab, the podcast where we stop romanticizing sales leadership and start talking about what actually moves the revenue needle. I'm your host, Dipti Pandit. If you are a CEO, CRO, sales leader, or anyone navigating the complexity of modern B2B selling, you are in the right place. This show exists for a reason. Sales leadership today is harder, faster, and more unforgiving than ever. And leaders deserve a space where the conversations are honest, unfiltered, and genuinely useful. That's what the Sales Leadership Lab is all about. Real strategies, real stories, real tools. No buzzwords, no theater. And I couldn't think of a better person to launch this journey than Darren Mitchell. Darren is a seasonal sales leader, executive coach, and the voice behind the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast, one of the most respected sales leadership shows across Australia. He has spent more than 2 decades helping organizations build cultures and accountability, sharpen their leadership muscle, and consistently deliver results in environments where excuses simply don't cut it. Welcome, Darren. Welcome to my podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks, Dipti. What a great introduction. Man, 20 years, 2 decades. That's a lot of time. Man, I'm starting to feel older and older and older, but it's, hey, we're just getting started though. There's so much more to do.
Oh, absolutely. Just for my listeners on the podcast, Darren has been my inspiration for this podcast, and it's been in the making, just in the thinking for a very long time. And after some nudges, I finally got to the podcast. So I thought, why not let me have Darren as my first guest? So I'm really looking forward for some great conversation. So Darren, let's start with your introduction from your words. Tell us about yourself.
So as you alluded to there, I've spent 20 plus years working in corporate. I actually left the corporate organizations 10 years ago to work on what I do now, which is working with sales teams, working with organizations, helping them and their leaders become what I call exceptional. And that is delivering sustainable results, replicable results, but also creating the cultures that enable success to be sustainable. And there's a lot of organizations out there that are continuing to struggle. And they're struggling because they're focused sometimes on the wrong things, and they're focused on behaviors and not necessarily the mindsets that sit behind the failures. And a leader has a lot to play in that particular realm. But prior to that, I spent, as I said, 20 plus years in corporate across a number of different organizations. Telemarketing, I've done customer service type roles. I spent a little bit of time running a project management team at a big organization called Telstra. But for the vast majority of my career, it was in sales. And then the last 10 years of my career running sales teams at both Optus and Telstra. So I understand and appreciate and can empathize with sales leaders today, particularly in the fast-paced instant gratification society when sales leaders are under constant pressure to hit a number at all costs. But I also think there's opportunities for sales leaders to really create environments where we're teaching more of our sales teams to be more independent in terms of their thinking, utilizing frameworks and teaching resourcefulness within the sales team, not just actually going out and hitting the numbers as quickly as possible and making hundreds and hundreds of phone calls. So I've actually enjoyed my career so far, but the reason I left corporate was I felt that, I don't know whether you call it a calling, but I believed when I was in the last few years of my career at Telstra, I got access to an executive coach as part of a high performance, high talent sort of development program that Telstra were sponsoring, which I was very grateful for. And I found that my executive coaching experience, I identified what I was good at, but also what I was really passionate about. And that was developing people, developing teams, not necessarily doing some of what I consider to be the admin-y type elements of sales leadership, which many people listening to this probably can appreciate that there's a lot of admin, there's a lot of stuff we've got to do that potentially takes our time away from developing our people and really developing them and generating value. So that led me on a path to go down the executive coaching path, and I did a coaching diploma. And then I started to do more coaching, more development, more mentoring, and I started to also facilitate some internal workshops. And so my path now is I exited in 2015. I now work, as I said, with sales teams, organizations, running workshops, facilitating, training, mentoring, coaching, and also, as you said, running a podcast, which has been going for 5.5 years now. So it's been an absolutely pleasurable journey. It's been a challenging journey, but it's something that I'm really grateful for.
That's an amazing experience all packaged together and different aspects of sales leadership and sales roles. And given your experience and how actively you've been working in this space, the first question that comes to my mind is about sales leadership in 2026.
Mhm.
What do you think has changed in sales leadership today?
From the perspective of expectations or the actual role itself?
I think the role itself, because our
Yeah.
audience largely is sales leaders or anyone who is looking for information or support or tools or strategies. So, if I'm in a
Yeah.
position as a sales leader, what would be something that you could share?
Well, one of the things that I continue to grapple with, and there's a lot of organizations who still today have almost like a hybrid model where they've got sales leaders who have been promoted into a position of leadership, but they also carry some form of individual target. So they've got a sales target, but also the expectation to run the sales team. I think that's a bit of a challenge because it almost creates a bit of a not so much different characteristics that are required, but the different skill sets that are required. And what I've often seen over my journey is sales people who are fantastic individual contributors, they often get promoted to a position of sales leadership because of their ability to generate the numbers. And the company looks upon them and says, well, Dipti, you've been a fantastic sales person. You've delivered these results. We're going to bestow upon you now a leadership role. And we're going to expect you to teach your team how they can be as successful as you have become. But we're not necessarily going to give you the toolkit, the transition plan, the blueprint to make that a seamless transition. So what I see a lot of sales organizations not doing well is not setting their sales leaders up for success. And looking into 2026 and beyond, it's the organizations that can firstly identify talent, ask these people who are talented, should they wish to move into a sales leadership role? Is that something they've thought about? Have they considered it? And if they have, then set them up for success. And part of the things that I'm thinking about and I'm sort of grappling with and suggesting to organizations is if you have a business that's big enough to warrant a sales leader, then enable them to be a sales leader. Don't enable them to be a super salesperson with some sales leadership responsibility. So make that delineation point. So if I'm going to make you a sales leader, set them up for success, give them the training, give them the mentoring, give them the frameworks, help them become as successful as possible because their team will benefit from that. The other thing for 2026 and beyond is this thing called AI that's coming in. The competition is getting more and more fierce. There is lots of expectations that customers have placed upon our organizations and therefore on our sales teams. So we need to think about what are the strategies that we're going to use to take advantage of the power of AI without losing our independence, without losing our unique value proposition. But I think the biggest thing for that is how do I have a sales leader that is given the ability to build a strategy, to empower their team, to also be able to coach, mentor, and develop their team. So unfortunately, even today in 2025, and I don't see this changing in many organizations that I work with and talk to lots and lots of people, is sales leaders are not given the bandwidth or the expectation to spend enough time with their sales teams coaching them. And when I say coaching them, not just coaching them on a deal, but coaching them on how to increase their competency and their capability on how to be a good salesperson, and that is a good problem solver. What we do know is coaching is probably the number one accelerator of performance in sales, but it's also the first thing that either gets rescheduled or cancelled because a lot of the sales leaders don't know how to coach. Why is that? Because the companies haven't invested in the training, the mentoring, the coaching on how to help sales leaders be true sales leaders, not just glorified administrators. And I say that with the greatest amount of respect. I've seen so many sales leaders unfortunately think that they're coaching, but what they're doing is they're interrogating the numbers, and they create an environment where their team are almost coming into a one-on-one or a team environment expected to have the forensic lens placed upon their pipeline and be asked questions such as, what is your gap closure strategy? Not asking questions on, how are you feeling? What's your strategy moving forward? Tell me about the strategy you've got for this particular customer. How are we building engagement? How are we actually trying to make this customer more attractive to what, or attracted to what we have to offer? So that's, if I'm thinking about a big differentiator for 2026, it's the sales organizations who are going to double down on their ability to empower their sales leaders to be actually sales leaders, coaches, mentors, not sales management administrators. That's a long-winded answer to a great question.
No, but everything you said makes a lot of sense. And I think the crux of this, and what we see quite actively in all organizations, is high achievers, high performers are promoted in leadership roles and they're not given the tools, which even I see across the board as well. What I find very interesting in sales is that it's a profession which is very highly paid, but we don't have a bachelor's or master's of sales. There is bachelor's and master's of all of the profession, which makes it further interesting that, there's so much of a gap in skilling and upskilling. So absolutely right to the point of skilling and upskilling and what organizations. Um, why do you think that organizations sort of don't prioritize training or upskilling? Because that's across the board. I've seen many organizations when it comes to what do you think are the main reasons for not really prioritizing? And what would be your suggestion in terms of how the big leaders can look at emphasizing on this aspect?
It's a really interesting question. And having spent a lot of time in a lot of organizations and asking this sort of a question, it comes down to a few things. And one of the most obvious ones is a lot of the training that does get created within sales organizations is very much product and service focused. So the company that has a product, let's just say they're an engineering company or they're an aeronautical sort of company. So they're very good at the technical aspects of the product that they sell. And therefore the training they invest is in the product, is in the service. How do we take this to market? We have the best product. So we have to increase the knowledge of our salespeople across the business so that they can go and sell this product. And sometimes the thinking, and this is not necessarily the executive's fault, it's often based on the conditioning of how they've been brought up in organizations where they receive the same type of training. And one of the things that's always difficult for many organizations to measure is this thing called return on investment or return on effort. And so if they don't have something tangible, because coaching, for example, is not something that you can hard and fast put in a metric to say within the next 3 months, we're going to deliver a 200% return on investment of the coaching. Because it's like, well, how long is a piece of string? What they can do though, is they can say, well, if we can increase the training on our product, our service, our technical aspects, at least when we sell that product, we can link that product sale, that revenue, to the training that we did, right? So it's often quite challenging to how to put the metric. What is a measurement of success of this particular training? What they don't necessarily then think about is the training that we deliver to salespeople and the training that we deliver to sales leaders, which is not the technical training. This is how to have a conversation, how to lead a customer through a buying process, how to actually understand the different types of people that we're dealing with, and therefore be able to adjust our communication style to suit the person that we're speaking with. Often that doesn't give us a return until sometime in the future. But the skill set that we're developing for those people enables us to develop a thing called sustainability and independence of thought, which means if we have the people demonstrating the right behaviors, then the results will take care of themselves down the track. But it's
Mm.
hard to put a number on it, and therefore it's often overlooked, or it's actually deprioritized because we might not be getting the numbers that we're looking for. Might be there's some constraints that have been placed upon us by head office. We have to cut budgets. So often the budget, the first thing that's cut is things like training, things like development, things like coaching and mentoring, because it's not cheap, right? You've got to be, when you're thinking about investing in a trainer or a facilitation, it's not a cheap investment. And one of the challenges therefore is what's the return on investment? So I think the key thing that great organizations will do is they will know that if I can enable my sales team, if I can enable my sales leaders and teach those people a level of resourcefulness, if I can then complement that with knowledge of their product, then they can be better problem solvers in the marketplace. They can build better, deeper relationships in the marketplace, increase the level of credibility, and through that, the payoff will be not just in the short term, but it'll be over the midterm and the long term, because we're now differentiating ourselves and our organization against our competitors, because our competitors are doing the same thing. They're actually just doing the product training, the sales training. We've got the best product. So it's very much a push approach, versus great organizations create that pull approach to say, how can we become attractive? Because here's the other thing. We know that people like to do business with those who they know, they like, and they trust, but also who they remember. So how do I have my sales team become memorable to the customers that they're interacting with? Understanding, of course, that only around about 2 to 3% of customers are ready to buy right now, which means 97% of our customers are not necessarily ready to buy right now. But we have to nurture that, and we have to continue to add value so that when they do get into that 3% buying now sort of cycle, who's the first person they think about? We want them
Mm.
to think about me as the
Yeah.
salesperson, the sales leader. Yeah.
Now, great answer. Like you said, the push and the pull, making an organization attractive, where the pull effect, I think it also translates as a culture in the ethos of the team. So when
Uh,
you have well trained, upskilled team members, everyone having a good sales pitch, and when they present themselves in front of the customer, they are
uh,
representing their organization. So it's
yeah.
that effect that just doesn't sit within the organization but flows and creates an impact onto customers. So I think that's an
Okay.
incredibly solid point. So Darren, you've got this tremendous experience working with so many customers over these years. You would have your lens and you would scan to get a sense of, a quick health check of typically a sales health check. So what is it that runs in your mind the first time? Because let's say I'm your client and you've come in and I've got tons of sales challenges. My team is doing terrible. My sales targets are never met. And I
Yeah.
really need that to come and help me. So through your lens, how would you see what are the areas that you would pick?
So one of the first things, and I actually had this conversation last night actually with a group, and we were talking
Nice.
about the fact that a lot of organizations, and look, I'm in the sales training business as you are. We do consulting and stuff like that. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations and people in the industry that we now work in tend to come in as if they know what the answers are before they actually walk into the organization.
Mm,
And so, almost like a salesperson who has a great product, they try to retrofit what they already have to what they think is a perceived problem.
mm,
I do something completely different. So, when I come into an organization, and I've done this with numerous clients over the years, I'll say to them up front, hey, I don't know what the solutions are going to be, because I don't yet know what the problem is. You're telling me there's a problem, and it could be I'm not getting the top line revenue. We're not getting the growth we're looking for. Profitability is down. Share of wallet is down. We're not getting the customer satisfaction scores that we would like to get. So one of the first things I do when I go into an organization is say, right, I'm not going to propose anything yet, because I don't know what it is that you are looking for or what it is that you need. What I need to do, though, is I need to spend some time within the organization and do a number of things. I need to spend some time with the sales leaders. I need to spend some time with some selected salespeople. I need to spend some time with some executives. And I also need to spend some time with some selected customers to try and get a sense of what's working well and where are there some potential gaps. So I call that a day in the life, and that could be a week, it could be a couple of days, depending on the size of the organization. It could just be a day where I do I follow them. I become like the shadow person. So we go and visit customers. I listen to calls. I see how sales meetings are run. I interview the sales executives, the executives of the sales team, and also interview customers. What I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to diagnose. And I often say to salespeople, we have to get better at being a person who can diagnose a problem. And I often use the analogy of, if you go to a doctor, is a doctor considered to be a salesperson, or is a doctor considered to be an expert? Now, you mentioned it before, is not many people go through sales university because there's not many organizations or universities that have sales as a curriculum. Having said
Uh,
that, there's lots of MBA programs now that are incorporating sales because they've started to realize that without sales, nothing happens. So if we can think as a sales leader and as a salesperson, my role is to diagnose. So part of my investigation before we start to do any ideas about how to fix some problems and plug some gaps is I've got to try and diagnose what is the actual challenge here, because it may be not as big as perhaps what they think. So if I can diagnose that, then I can come back and create a blueprint for what that diagnosis looks like and what are the possible solutions that they can look at implementing to fix the diagnosis. Only then can we create a program, and that's the thing that I would typically do. So, and I want to try and get more and more salespeople to think of themselves as doctors, right? So if you go to a doctor, the doctor will ask you a series of questions, and the purpose of asking those questions is try to identify what is the potential diagnosis of the challenge by which you came to the doctor in the first place. So a
right.
doctor doesn't
Yeah.
get and say, "Hey, Dipti, you've come to me today. We've got this fantastic brand new pharmaceutical elixir, and it's coming in this bottle, and you get a money back guarantee. If it doesn't give you the results within 30 days, we'll give you your money back. How many would you like?" If you went into a doctor like that, you're thinking, "Show me the door. I'm out of here." But you go to a doctor, first of all, because they are considered to be an expert, right? And they will ask you questions because their role is to diagnose what the problem is, which you may not know what the problem is.
Absolutely. And a very apt example, like, the doctor and the diagnosis and the health. And health of a business is very serious as well. It's something you
Mm,
cannot take lightly because you're running a big business. It's taken so much of an effort and so many lives are at stake. You've
yeah.
built the business, got to a position, the longevity of the business, all of this is serious stuff. Now, and that's where doctors like yourselves come in. And then you can say, hey, you need a medicine or do you need to go to the ICU? I
Mm.
can help you both. Interesting. Now, that was a great answer. Um, Picking your brains, have you had any interesting experiences? I mean, no pressure. I was just throwing you under the bus to pick your brain and get an example. Anything you can share with us?
In terms of what sort of thing that didn't work, or
Some diagnosis which was probably an eye opener for your client or something, any incidents. This was a bit peculiar, not my usual
well,
one.
I'll give you at the risk of sounding beige and vanilla, I'll give you there's a trend. There's a trend. And I say when most organizations believe that they have when we're not getting the numbers, they think they've got a salesperson problem or they've got a product problem. What they actually have is a diagnosis problem because the people who are selling the product haven't properly diagnosed the solution for the problem that the customer actually has, or they've misdiagnosed it. And the reason for that is a lot of salespeople, rightly or wrongly, and this comes back to the training they've been given, the product stuff we've already spoken about, they think that I have to sell this product in order to make my number. So I'm going to go out into the marketplace and proactively talk about my product, hoping that I can retrofit this product into the need that the customer has. So my diagnosis process is I'm going to diagnose what I think is a problem, which is going to fit my product. And I'm going to now try to retrofit my product into the diagnosis, which already is a preconceived idea that I have. And then they wonder why their customers are saying, hang on, that's not for us. And they give objections. What I say to sales teams all the time, and I say this to leaders all the time as well, is you've got to understand one thing. And this is a really important point to understand. Your customers are not waking up every single day wishing and wanting to buy your product. They're just not. And unfortunately, right now, there are salespeople and sales leaders and sales organizations, not just in Australia, but around the world, that are thinking we have the best products. We just have to put it out there and people are going to fall over themselves to want to buy it. That is not the case. They're not wishing for your product. They're not going to wake up and say, oh, Dipti's got this fantastic. I better give Dipti a call and see if I can buy that product she's got on sale right now. They're not. What they're looking for and what they're thinking about is, I've got a problem. I've got a challenge. And sometimes they don't actually know they've got a problem, but they're just not getting the results they want, or there's a feeling that they might have. So what I say to sales teams all the time is, can you actually have a conversation with a potential customer and resist the temptation to talk too early about your product? And in fact, can you have an entire conversation with a customer and not mention your product whatsoever? Now,
Love it.
when I propose that to salespeople, they say, well, what else am I going to talk about? And so, well, that's interesting, isn't it? So that tells me that potentially a lot of your training, a lot of your thinking is very product centric, which is almost like push centric. Versus if you think about a person who diagnoses, they don't know whether the product or the service that they have at their disposal is going to be the right solution for that particular customer's problem. My job, first and foremost, is to find out, do you have a problem? Do you have a challenge? And if so, is this a challenge that A, you want to solve, and B, you need to solve? And only then will I give the benefit of this customer maybe having a look at the product. Now, that takes a lot of patience, and in some cases that takes a lot of courage, because here I have this wonderful product. And the temptation is to actually lead with that product and talk about all the features, the benefits of that product. What I've got to think about is, hey, I might have the key to life sitting in this bottle here. But if the person I'm talking to doesn't need the key to life because they're already nourished, they're already hydrated, then this is irrelevant. So don't give it to them.
Makes sense.
So what we're talking about there is, if we can help our salespeople become more curious, be better at diagnosing challenges, what you might actually find is what you thought was the problem is not actually a problem, and it could be something different. Now, here's the thing. If I, through that diagnostic process, can identify a challenge that a customer perhaps didn't even know they had through that conversation, and if I can help articulate that problem perhaps better than they can themselves, in their mind, they're thinking, Dipti must have a solution to this problem. And so the natural next step is, do you have a solution for this? And then we can go through the process of maybe sharing the solution to the problem. But it only comes after we feel confident that we've diagnosed the actual problem and verified with the customer, is this something that they want to solve and they need to solve?
What are some of those quality traits you see in high-performing sales leaders versus the not-so-high-performing sales leaders from your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was starting by saying there's a long list of answers to this, a long list of characteristics, but I'll try to keep it really brief. One of the first things I always ask a sales leader is, why are you a sales leader and why did you become a sales leader? Now, I'm asking that question with the presupposition that they chose to move into that role. And that's not always the case, because as we've already talked about, sometimes sales leaders are given that position because they've been a great individual contributor. And if they don't know how to make the transition and demonstrate the characteristics and the skill sets that separates a sales leader from a super salesperson, they'll always be a super salesperson, right? So when we're talking about characteristics that separates what I call the exceptional sales leader from everybody else, The first characteristic that an exceptional sales leader has is curiosity, and they have things like empathy, and they have a big level of servitude. And by that, I mean they don't profess to know everything. They might have the benefit of experience, but they don't come in and actually give the benefit of experience unsolicited. They will lead with curiosity. They will lead with empathy. They'll also have courage to have the conversations, and they also know when to get out of the way. What they will do is they'll work really, really hard at building up their salesperson, their sales team, so that the salesperson is the front of the sales campaign, if you like. They are the decision maker. They are the key person. And a great sales leader will almost be the invisible person in the background. They might be like the conductor of the orchestra, but they're not the salesperson themselves. And that's hard because sometimes the sales leader has been used to being at the front of the sales campaign, leading that particular campaign, and it's just natural for them to do that. And it's not something that they do consciously to deposition their sales team, but often when they do that, they do deposition their sales team and what I call disintermediate their sales team in front of their customers. So an exceptional sales leader will have curiosity, they will have a level of empathy, they'll have a high level of servitude, and they'll realize that they are there to serve their team. Their team are not there to serve them. And so they also know how to get out of the way and build their team up and encourage their team to take initiative, to take responsibility. And one of the biggest things they do is they try to teach their team a level of resourcefulness. And this is something that I learned very early in my sales leadership career when I thought the best way to build trust with my team was to give them all the answers. And I thought by giving them the answers, in other words, giving them resources, that would build trust and that would enable us to have a really successful sales team. What I did instead is I built a level of codependency where my team was expecting me to solve problems and I was expecting them to come to me to solve problems. And that wasn't a recipe.
Lovely. I think the crux of a lot of things that we talked about comes to the culture of organizations. And we've seen and heard so many times, basically the culture, and culture goes top to bottom. What do you see are the reasons why culture is such a barrier? And what would you recommend? What would be the strategies you would recommend the top leaders on how they can really help build good cultures?
It's a great question. And it's one of those topics that probably has many, many different potential answers. One of the things that I see a lot, and I saw it through my own career, and I've seen it since I've sort of exited corporate and now working with a lot of organizations, is when people get to a certain level of influence or status or position within an organization, rightly or wrongly, their eyes tend to stay at the same level and look up. They don't spend as much time looking down. And I say that really respectfully because often they're placed in a position of responsibility. The expectations is very high, whether it be a CEO that wants to them be at the beck and call. It might be a board of directors they have to report to. There's all these different expectations. You might have different stakeholders that are just wanting their flesh the whole time. The unfortunate thing, which does drive culture, is we have leaders that lead by absence. And if you think about what people within the organization are craving, they're craving time with their leaders. So the leaders that lead by absence, and I see that, and it's just a really simple example. I often see leaders when they walk into the office, right? And I know we've got hybrid environments now, but let's just say we've got an office environment. The leader comes in out of the lift. The leader walks through the foyer, walks past all of the people who are in their team, walks straight to their office, close the door, sit down, and they start working on strategy. And not a single person was greeted between the lift and the office. Now, the leader may well have been in their head thinking, I've got this really important document I've got to create. I've got this strategy. I've got the CEO who is actually asking me to get this report done by 12 p.m. So I've got to go, and that's where my focus is. And I'm not saying this is intentional, but unfortunately what happens is they don't walk through and say hello to people. As simple as that sounds, the ignoring of the people as they go on their mission to get to the task of getting that report done starts to create an impression on their team that my leader doesn't care, or my leader didn't say hello. My leader, whatever they're doing, it's more important than me. And now you do that over and over and over again, you start to create a habit, and through the habit, you start to create a culture. And this culture may actually be completely in contradiction to the values that we have of the organization and the things that we say that we represent, because the behavior is something completely different. So what I do see in great teams, in great cultures, and in great leaders is, irrespective of the size of the organization, it is a really flat meritocracy where you've got senior leaders that are accessible. You've got senior leaders that build relationships with people in multiple levels of the organization because they genuinely care. And if we think about this, our people are always asking us the question, do you care about me as a person? And if you care about me as the person, then you'll say hello to me, as simple as that sounds. So whilst culture can actually start from the top down, culture can also start from the bottom up as well. So what sort of behaviors do we want our team to demonstrate and play out? And it's the simple things like saying hello to people. It's actually showing a genuine interest in another human being, not always just talking about business. So senior leaders, if you're listening to this, when's the last time you sat down and actually had an ad hoc conversation with somebody and you spoke to them as a human being, not related to the sales number, the pipeline, the customer issues? You just had a conversation person to person.
But I think, Darren, you spoke some really incredible points, like walking into the office, sitting and doing strategy. And interestingly, I have seen leaders who use big words. "Yeah, I'm doing strategy. I got to report into the board." And they're away. They're not connected with the team. And they're not in depth with what's happening in their own business, what's happening in the market. And that's
Yeah,
that's a very, very important point. Really good messaging out there.
yeah.
Darren, we're coming almost towards the last leg of our podcast. I wish I could keep you for hours and hours. We really can talk on a lot of topics. So I've got another burning question for you, Darren. Particularly like being in sales leadership role myself, and especially when I was promoted newly into sales leadership role.
Yeah,
I was like, what next? What do I do? And this is a
yeah,
question that I see in a lot of new sales leaders who've been promoted or they are sales leaders for the first time. The
yeah,
exciting part is that you are a leader now, but you've got a lot to manage. And what I
yeah.
call it sandwiched in sales, because you're reporting into the top, you also got to manage the team below. So, what are some of the
Yeah.
tips and strategies you would recommend for a new leader?
It's a great question. I'll reflect on what I did when I first became a sales leader. And look, I didn't do this perfectly because I did mention that I created an environment of codependency. One of the first things to sit down and think about is, what are the elements of my role that I want to get really good at? What are some key things I need to put my focus on? And if you don't get a transition plan or you don't get some support internally, I'd also look for somebody within my network who can be a sounding board, a mentor, or a coach. I've got to understand that my role as a sales leader, in many cases, or not in many cases, in pretty much all cases, will be different to my role as an individual sales contributor. So I can't be the salesperson. I can't be the super salesperson. I've got to learn to be able to step back and enable my team and empower my team to do the work. Now, I might act as a coach. I might act as a mentor. I might act in some cases as a manager because we still have to keep the pipeline flowing. But I'll be sitting down and thinking about, what is my top priorities? And I sometimes call it the vital few. So what are the vital few behaviors that I need to put in place that will enable my team to improve their competency, to be more independent? And how do I start to train them on developing a higher level of resourcefulness so they don't just rely on me for the answers? So what I'm talking about there is, I'm looking at my sales team as almost mini sales leaders themselves, and they're running their own portfolio as their own business. and therefore they have to take responsibility for those as their own business. So what sort of decisions they're going to make, what sort of strategies they're going to make. By all means, I become a sounding board, but I'm not necessarily going to give them the answers. So I have to resist the temptation of jumping in and providing the solutions. I've got to lead with that level of curiosity we talked about before, asking questions, maybe challenging them in terms of their thinking, maybe giving them some things to think about that might identify some gaps from which they can now reflect and maybe come up with their own tactics and strategies to fill those gaps. But the biggest thing is I've got to try and make sure that I'm allowing them to develop that level of resourcefulness where if I'm not there, I do have the confidence they'll find a way to solve a problem, to have a conversation, to ask questions so they can be self-sufficient and not reliant on me. Because what I say to the sales leaders, and this is something that my very first sales manager, and I'll always be grateful for him, he's a guy called Danny Ledden. He sat me down my first day as a sales leader and said two things. He said, one, welcome to sales leadership, the bottom rung of the ladder. And two, he said, who is your likely successor? And what he was trying to instill in me from the first day, this was literally the first morning of my first day in the role of a sales leader. He was literally trying to tell me your role as a sales leader is to get to the point where you are redundant. And I'll never, ever forget that. And it's kind of been the cornerstone of my entire leadership philosophy since that day. And it's what I teach leaders all the time. Your role is to make yourself redundant as quickly as possible so that your leadership shadow can be so long that your team is actually going to be in a really good shape, that you no longer need to be there, but it doesn't mean you're going to be made redundant from the company. It means that you'll be actually given more opportunities because not everybody has the focus on how do I make myself redundant as quickly as possible, because the ones that do are the ones that are always going to be in very, very high demand. I was coaching a sales leader. I'm trying to think. It's probably back in 2017, and this particular sales leader, I won't mention his name, but he was working for a beer company. And he was responsible for running a sales team that was selling into pubs, bottle shops, those sort of things. And we had this conversation around control, and he was grappling with he needed to be across everything. And it sounded like the way he was describing it, he was very much like a micromanager, wanting to know absolutely everything. And it came from a position of, I guess, uncertainty and let's just say fear, because it appeared that his senior leader was always asking him questions and he felt as if he needed to always know the answer. So he felt as if he had to have his finger on every single thing was happening within his team and across his customers, because if he didn't know that, his senior manager might have thought, well, you don't know what you're doing, therefore you're maybe not the right person for the role. So we had this conversation around control, and it just came off the top of my head. I said, and I won't even use his name, I'll just say, hey, Tom, if you're a person that is always wanting to be in control, how do you actually get more control? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, what if you let go of the need to be in control? Would that give you more control? And he goes, and you could just see there was this light bulb that went off. So from that day forward, I've always thought, hey, if I want to gain more control, let go of the need to be in control. And what that does, it enables you to change your thinking. It enables you to actually open up more possibilities. It enables you to be more curious, and it enables you to be less focused on, I have to get this right. But the presupposition there is there's always an answer to every problem. I just need to let go of the need to find the perfect solution and just literally go with the flow. And what will be. And thinking about, well, what do I actually have control over right now? I have control over what I do in this particular moment. I have control over what I say. I have control over what I think. I don't have any control over what my customer does. And I certainly don't have any control over what my salesperson does in this particular moment. I can influence it, but if I let go of the need to be in control, funnily enough, I actually gain more control because I've got more options available to me. And through that, I have a high level of confidence that no matter what is thrown at me, I have the resources to be able to deal with it when and if it's presented. So for somebody who is listening to this, who perhaps is in an environment where you feel as if you have to be across everything, now it's easy for me to say, and it's easy for us to say, hey, just let go of it and what will be will be. but really think about, well, what do I actually have control over, as distinct from what can I influence? Now, if you really analyze this, there's very few things that happen in our external environment that we actually have control over. And it's simple things. I don't have any control over how my salesperson communicates with me or reacts to me or behaves. I can influence it, but I don't have control over it. So let go of the need to be in control of that. Just say, okay, what am I actually seeing? What am I observing? What am I hearing? And based on that, what do I have control over? Here's what I do have control over. I have control over the choice that I make in terms of how I respond to that. That's what I have control over. And I found that was really freeing because it meant that I didn't have to pretend to be somebody that I wasn't. And I often use the golf analogy. I could just play the ball as it lied. So whatever I've got in front of me, I'll actually deal with what's in front of me and I'll think, what's the best way for me to choose to respond in this particular situation versus I want to be in control of what the outcome is because there's no such thing as perfection. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Darren. That is incredible. I have like lots of questions, but I think we just going run out of time. And I'd love to have you back again at some point and share more insights and strategies. But thank you so much. And before we go, so what would be some last words or some message you'd love to share with our listeners today?
Well, firstly, Dipti, thank you for the opportunity. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be your very first guest on the Sales Leadership Lab. Greatly appreciate that, and thank you so much for the opportunity. One of the lasting messages I'd like to leave sales leaders, and it's something that I learnt very early on when I had a mentor that I took on board early in my sales leadership career, and that is sales leadership is not about you. You are the least important person in the room. And that's not to say that you think of yourself less compared to your team, but when you realize that your role as a sales leader is to empower and to serve your team, it's not to get them to make you look good. You actually let go of a lot of the stuff, and there's no such thing as competition. I'm not here to compete with other sales leaders, right? I'm here to create an environment where my sales team can become the very best versions of them. And they now, in turn, can become the very best servers of their customers, then you're going to have people coming back time and time again. Now, you'll have some customers that leave, and we know that, and they leave for various reasons. But if I recognize that as a sales leader, it's not about me. It's not about me getting the accolades. It's not about me standing in front of the team, getting all the being in bright lights. It's not about me sitting in front of the sales, the senior executive or the sales chief revenue officer and saying, yes, my team did this. It's a case of, I'm so proud to lead this team. This team, yes, they make me look good, but I don't do it for that. I do it because I want to help people become really good versions of themselves and serve their customers, but serve for the greater good. Now that might sound very motherhoody, and I get that. And there'll be people out there that say, oh, that's just absolute rubbish. I'm here to make as much money as I can and achieve as much status as I possibly can. Well, good on you. Just notice how many people are going to follow you. Here's what I do know, and this is what I want to leave people with. If as a sales leader, I don't make it about myself, but I put all of my focus and my attention on how do I help my sales team become extraordinary at what they do, what will happen is you'll find there'll be people that want to follow you no matter where you go. You'll have people that are following you and they'll choose to follow you. They simply won't follow you because the hierarchy in the organization says they must because they report to you. There's a very big difference. So my whole attitude is I'm here to serve my team. It is not about me. It never has been and it never will be. But through that process, guess what? People become very loyal because of how you make them feel, and they will follow you because you're leading them. They'll follow you no matter where you go, and you'll always leave an indelible impression upon them. So
Amazing,
there you go.
amazing. It's a small world. I love it. Absolutely. Thanks, Darren. And if our listeners are looking at how do we reach Darren, I will be putting Darren's contact details. But anything quickly, Darren, you want to share about your contact details?
Oh, just LinkedIn, Dipti. Just look
Yep.
up LinkedIn, put my name in, look up on Google Sales Leadership Coach, and it'll come up with me. And in there also, there's a link to my podcast, the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. So
It's an
and go into that and
amazing podcast.
look for the 2 episodes, which I had the superstar, Dipti Pandit, on.
Oh, yeah. Please listen to them as well. But Darren, you've done what, 800 plus podcast over the last 5 years? Amazing,
Yes.
incredible. And every time I'm in my car, if I have to switch on to a sales podcast, it is the Exceptional Sales Leader. So I personally highly recommend, but also do listen to my podcast as well.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Darren. Thank you so much.